So with that, briefly, what we did was to look at what we gave our presentation outline last week. We talked about the critical issues of what the risk is. And we said risk is the impact of uncertainty on objective, or the effect of uncertainty on objectives. We looked at the project management definition of risks, and where they mentioned about uncertain event conditions that if it occurs, it will have negative or positive effect on project objectives. We went through the processes of looking at some issues that may be affected by project risk respectfully. And those ones are the scope of the project, time, resources, technology, and unpredicted situations. Then we look at also the fact that risk is ubiquitous. It's always everywhere it's present. It could be negative and positive, as we said. And negative risks are usually called threats or challenges, and positive risks are opportunities. We also said that risks can be quantitative as well. And quantitative risks are those ones that can be easily quantified. And qualitative risk are risks that cannot be easily quantified, but we are enjoined to always try as much as possible to quantify all qualitative risk. We also looked at why project risk management. We look at a couple of definitions. What is a project portfolio? So we looked at the fact that projects are a temporary endeavor with the beginning and end, and the purpose is to create a unique output, product, or service. And we looked at what programs are. We say it's a group of related projects. And we also looked at what portfolios are: programs, projects, and related operational works, which are implemented to achieve a strategic business objective or goals. And we also made the point, Chief, that project risk management applies to all types, whether projects, programs, or portfolios. We also went through why project management or risk management is very important. First of all, to avoid project failure. We also looked at some benefits of projects, which we said about 90% of challenges on projects are reduced if project risk management is in place. The fact that it also enhances or prevents firefighting on projects. We looked at the fact that project management or risk management also helps reduce surprises and improves communication. And the benefits are numerous. Eventually, we said, when you do effective project risk management, the success of the project is very much highly guaranteed. And we also mentioned that in spite of all these, a lot of people still do not adopt risk management on projects. We said the too busy mentality, the bad omen mentality, the what can come mentality, which we explained very well, the cost mentality, and the fact that people always think that it is project risk management is very expensive, it's time consuming, so they don't want to do it. We also looked at the project life cycle view of risk management, where we looked at risks without the various phases: the planning or concept phase, design phase, bid and procurement phase, construction phase, and then the occupancy phase. And we last week spoke at length about the fact that when we take this view, we can identify a lot of risks along the project life cycle. And at the beginning, opportunities are big, the amount at stake is very low, but as the project progresses, the risks and opportunities drop until the final end where the project is completed, but the amount at stake rises gradually until the end of the project. However, the most significant part of the project, if it fails, is where the arrows are indicating that that place, if the project fails, we will lose a lot. We also looked at the need to embed risk management with the core management principles, which we outlined using this slide. We also looked at why the risk management planning process itself. We said risk management planning or risk management itself has 6 main components. We mentioned one, risk management planning itself, the risk identification itself, qualitative risk analysis, quantitative risk analysis, risk response planning, and then risk monitoring. Then we went into looking at risk planning itself. We said when it comes to risk planning, there are a couple of things we needed to look at. First of all, we need to plan for the risk management process itself, and we have to ask some questions. We said, how risky is the project? Is this a familiar project? Is there past experience from a project for which you can refer to? How visible and viable is the project? What is the size of the project? Is it big or small or medium? And we said risks, whether big or small, will occur on projects, whether the projects are big or small, so to speak. So, but the fact must be said that bigger the project, the higher the risk. We went through now the risk management planning itself as one of the 6 components of the risk management process. We said the outcome of the risk management process usually should come with the risk management plan, and the risk management plan helps project team to prepare for unexpected events on the project. And it is very important that we cover the risk management plan when we are doing risk management very comprehensively. We looked at some of the key components of the risk management plan: the documentation, methodology, rules, responsibility, budgeting, timing, risk documentation, probability, impact, and all that. Then we got into risk identification, and we said that risk identification has to do with identifying potential risks that could seriously impact project success, and that could create a significant deviation from the project. We look through the fact that risk identification is a challenging and a daunting task. It is not the responsibility of one person, and every project has a risk. And we say that we should not play ostrich with risk. We would face them whether we are prepared or not. And it's better we prepare for them so that when they come, we are able to deal with them properly. And risk is present in all types of projects in execution, whether you use the predictive approach, the agile approach, or the hybrid approach. Risk is always present, and we have to manage them all along. And we said risk identification is a continuous iterative process. We need to ask all the why questions or the W questions, and the fact that it is not, if something is known as a fact, it is no longer a risk, it is an issue. And then that we have to know that risk management or risk identification is a process, and it's not an event. We went through that last time, and then we look at certain preconditions that should necessitate risk management. They need to understand the project, they need to identify risk events on a project, and of course to document the risk. So where we are starting today has to do with this particular slide. So I'm going to go pretty slow on this because the previous presentations or the previous point were to recap what we did last time. So when it comes to risk identification, we have what we call the risk identification cycle. And it's important that to do proper risk identification, every organization goes through this process, especially when it comes to project risk identification. So we have template specification. And when it comes to template specification, we're looking at the organization or the project defining templates that should be used on the project, cause-effect relationship, how projects should be defined, how risks should be defined on all projects. It is important that this particular thing is clarified. We have to look at basic identifications where we carry SWOT analysis, analogy from experience or experience from previous projects. We have to analyze them to be able to bring to fore the basic risks that we need to identify on the project. Detailed identification would involve using tools like interviewing. After identifying the risk, we need to go through a process of interviewing assumption and other techniques to further enhance the already identified risks from the basic analysis. Then we have to do what we call the external cross-check, which involves checking what typical risk categories exist. And in doing this, we use what we call affinity diagram, affinity grouping, risk breakdown structure, which is a hierarchical decomposition of the risk into the various components, would also have to be carried out. Then we have to do what we call the internal cross-check, where within the organization, we have to ensure that each of the risks identified in the risk breakdown structure is mapped to the work breakdown structure. So there are two terminologies here. The risk breakdown structure, which is a hierarchical breakdown of the various risks identified on a project, grouped and then linked properly. The work breakdown structure is what we all know as the BOQ, bills of quantity. It is also a decomposition of the various activities on the work to their minutest possible. So the various work that has been done on a project have to be linked to each of the risks identified in order to create a very unique relationship and understanding of the risk. Any risk that is not unmapped would have to be watched critically, because every risk must be to the fact that it affects or impacts on an objective, and objectives are outlined in the programs. Then the most important point, the final point, is what we call the statement finalization, where the whole risk statement is finalized using flowcharts to investigate project risk areas. We also use the process to also understand how the risks will impact on all processes of the project. There are various tools that are used. We have the fishbone diagram, or otherwise known as the Ishikawa diagram, to ascertain potential causes and effects on projects. And all these things, the process is a very detailed one, but because of time, I'll move on very quickly. Then we also have to appreciate that when it comes to projects, in risk identification, there are certain commonly occurring risks, and we cannot lose sight of them. Construction risk, performance risk, scope creep risk, operational risk, and a list of them as I've presented, as you can see. The advice here is that when you are doing project risk identification, it is important to exhaust virtually all these risks and more. So this is a guide. If you're doing risk identification and you've not been able to cover all the space and blade of grass when it comes to risk identification or the common risks that occur on projects, then you might be missing out on some of the risks that have to be identified. So it is a comprehensive process which management must go through. Then, finally, the most important thing, at the end of the risk identification process, you will come out with what we call the risk breakdown structure, which I discussed earlier. And the risk breakdown structure is what in other professions is called the risk universe. It is actually the total risk identified on a project. It's a universe of risk on a given activity. And note that we said that risk is the impact of uncertainty on objectives. So once there are objectives, we must have risk. And those risks, which will be identified through a very comprehensive process, would comprise or compose of what we call the risk universe or the risk breakdown structure. So it's typically that's how one sample of a risk breakdown structure is. So the technical issues on the project, the external issues on the project, organizational issues, managerial issues. You break them down to further levels, requirement, technology, complexity. Each of these will be further broken down to the minutest activity on the project or the minutest risk on the project. So it is a very long, comprehensive process, but once you do it, it will help the project success, as we have always said. Now, we go on to the other critical component of risk process, which is analyzing the risk. Now, there are two main types of risk analysis, which is done on projects, and the Project Management Institute recognizes two of them: qualitative risk analysis and quantitative risk analysis. So the question before us is that, what is qualitative risk analysis? So qualitative risk analysis really involves the use of qualitative tools, methods, really to assess the likelihood and impact of risks which we've identified on the project, and more importantly, to prioritize them according to what their impacts are on the project. And there are a lot of benefits when it comes to qualitative risk analysis. First of all, it focuses on the high priority risks of the project. It is also very easy to do. It provides because you really have to do it based on impact and likelihood and analysis. All those ones are ordinal scales or cardinal scales. Usually, when it comes to qualitative risk analysis, the ordinal scales are used, that is high, low, medium. Then the cardinal scales are the ones you use figures to actually represent the risk in terms of their priority. Again, qualitative risk analysis will provide a very strong basis for quantitative risk analysis. We said at the initial point that as far as practicable, project managers and sponsors must try and quantify all qualitative risk. So that's why. But there are certain limitations, a couple of limitations when it comes to qualitative risk analysis. First of all, it is subjective because it now bases on somebody's perception how to determine the likelihood of a risk or even the impact. Usually when you go through the risk identification process using a qualitative analysis, this you see a lot of people having a lot of debates about their perception of the likelihood and impact, and because of the subjectivity. Of course, additionally, one important limitation is that it does not provide the overall project risk exposure, especially for project management, cost of the risk management process, and how to treat the risks would not be evident when you use qualitative risk analysis. So the best one usually through
Doc, your line is breaking. Can you position yourself well? Okay.
Okay. I think it's my internet. Is it better now, sir?
Yes.
Hello.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
So in performing qualitative risk analysis, according to the Project Management Institute, there are inputs: the risk management plan, the scope baseline, and all the others that are displayed. And the tools would have to do with risk probability and impact assessment, probability impact matrix. So then at the end of it all, applying the inputs and the tools and techniques, it will yield what is known as a project document update, because you have to update the project document with all the qualitative risk analysis processes. Now, we mentioned some of the tools, and I won't go through it because of time, so I'll just show it to you. So risk probability matrix, where we do a lot of assessment of what the likelihood of the risk is and the probability. We categorize the risk into the various groupings, and then we do risk data quality assessment. It is important that the data that is used for qualitative risk analysis is reliable, comprehensive, and useful. And in the process of doing qualitative risk analysis, we have to vouch for the validity of all these. Then we have risk agency assessments. Some risks on certain projects have to be determined and treated with a lot of agency. And this qualitative process also enables us to do that. Then another tool at our disposal is what is called the expert judgment, where we actually engage on expertise to help us draw up that and tease out the qualitative risk assessment issues on the project. Now, what is important to also note that at the end of the whole process, you come up with what is known as the probability and impact matrix. And it is like this. So you have the impact on the top and then the probability on the vertical axis. So normally others have 5 to 5, others have 6 to 6, 7 to 7, whatever it is. But here we have 5 to 5 matrix. So you have trivial, minor, moderate, major, extreme on the impact aspect, and rare, unlikely, moderate, likely, and very likely. So it's a combination of this. So if it is rare and it's trivial, then that risk is low. And this low classification is what we call risk significance. For risk significance is the multiplication of the probability of a risk occurrence with the impact. So the low ones are green, the medium ones, well, these are risks within certain ranges which you have to keep watch. And then the very high one, those ones that will significantly impact project success. So this is what the qualitative process would yield. Now we go through the quantitative process of risk analysis. Now here it involves the use of numerical data and analysis and of related risks and project risk consequences. So quantitative analysis is performed to achieve usually 4 main objectives. 1, first of all, to determine the probability of meeting specific project objective. 2, to quantify risk exposures to enable the determination of costs and schedule reserves. Schedule reserve is like what we call the contingency reserves on projects. So these are two critical benefits of the quantitative risk analysis process. As I said earlier, quantitative risk analysis allows us to be able to cost projects, whilst qualitative does not really provide that data. Then it also provides us the opportunities, or the aim is to ascertain project risk that require major attention, and additionally, to ascertain the realistic cost of schedules and programs on a project. So these are the four main objectives of quantitative risk analysis, and we must keep that always at the back of our minds. Now, there are a lot of tools that are used to do quantitative risk analysis, and for engineers, I'm sure most of you are very technically adept at some of these statistical tools. One of them is sensitivity analysis, where we do what-if analysis and tornado diagrams to in this particular situation, we are regressing basically all the variables on the project against each other to determine what will happen to the total project success if one variable changes relative to others. Then we have what you call the expected value analysis, where probability is multiplied by actually the project amount at stake to determine the value of that particular risk. And usually decision tree and other tools are also used there. Then we have modeling and simulation. And the most popular tool for modeling and simulation is the Monte Carlo simulation. And again, because we don't have time to do this, it's a whole process that has to be discussed and understood. Then the impact analysis, where the likelihood of occurrence is measured against the severity of impact on the project. And so these are some of the tools available for quantitative risk analysis. Now, we go to the fifth aspect of the risk management process, which is risk response. Risk response is very, very critical when it comes to project risk management, because the issue is this: if we go through the rigors of identifying all the project risks, classifying them, categorizing them, prioritizing them, using qualitative and quantitative analysis, this stage is the most critical aspect of the risk management exercise, especially on projects. How project team responds to all that we've done so far. So risk response enables us to enhance opportunities on projects and reduce threats. So our response would determine how much we maximize our opportunities on the project and reduce project threat. It is very critical. So risk response planning basically entails two critical things. First of all, assigning persons or people to risks. So there must be a risk response owner or a risk owner. Every risk must have somebody identified on the project who is supposed to respond to it, treat it. Then, more additionally, secondly, and more importantly, then it must have the addressing of risks according to the second aspect is the fact that the risks have to be addressed and prioritized properly. It is important. This is a very important point. We have to ensure that risk response owners understand all the triggers of project risk, and most importantly, how to apply the appropriate risk response strategies. And this comes as a result of training. So all project managers, project team members have to go through a process of knowing exactly how they respond when risk occurs on projects. And additionally, the risk owners should be assigned specific response strategies for each identified risk that has been analyzed and documented. Now, the other point we have to go through in the process is to understand that risk response should do or achieve a couple of things. One, risk response should be appropriate and commensurate with the severity of the risk. The analogy here is that it is unwise to use a sledgehammer to kill a mosquito. You don't use a risk that is overly commensurate, overly strong against a certain risk, because risk response involves a lot of money. 2, risk response should be timely and cost-effective. You don't respond to a risk way after it has happened. If you've gone through the risk management process, you should be able to predict the risk and be able to notice the triggers. The moment the triggers are activated, then you should put in place your response strategy quickly so that it is timely and cost-effective. Risk response actions should also be realistic and commonly agreed and understood. Again, that is what the benefits to the team is. Everybody should understand what they have to do in terms of responding to risk on the project, and that understanding should be shared among the team members. Then finally, and most importantly, there should be an owner for every risk response action. Very important. So some of the tools and the processes that the PMI, Project Management Institute, from the PMBOK, Project Management Book of Knowledge, puts up for all project managers to look at is the input requirement, the risk management plan, and the risk register. Then the various tools for analyzing the various risks on the project, and that must yield the project management plan or the project document. Now, there are several strategies for managing risks, especially responding to negative risks on projects or threats. One of them, or there are 4 models when it comes to project risk management, 4 key models. You either avoid the risk, you mitigate it, you transfer it, or you accept it. So avoiding risk means that you intend to actually eliminate the risk as far as practicable. So some of the things that can be done on a project is to maybe look at changing project objectives or reducing project scope, or using very proven or well time-tested approaches to dealing with project issues instead of going for very costly, risky, innovative approaches. Or you use alternative components to deal with some aspects of the project to reduce the risk or avoid the risk as much as possible. Mitigation has to do really with the fact that you cannot avoid the risk, but you need to put in controls to bring down the impact of the risk. So you conduct a lot of tests on the project, you put in systems and processes to reduce the impact and react and respond properly to the risk when they occur. And sometimes you embed redundancy in projects in order to provide backup resources to be able to respond and deal with risk when they happen. Risk transfer basically has to do with the fact that you are deflecting the risk to another person. So the things we do on our project, the guarantees, bonds, warranties that we sign with contractors are forms of risk transfer. And we all know the critical ingredient of projects everywhere is the sharing of risk. Outsourcing can also be one, subcontracting, and the contract type. If you have a fixed price contract, it means that you, the owner, will bear a lot of the fixed price contract, means the contractor will bear a lot of the risk, especially in times of inflation. But if it's a reimbursable contract, then the owner is likely to bear most of the risk of increasing prices. So the type of contracting will also indicate how we intend to transfer some of the risk on the project and who takes what. Then the next one, or the last one, has to do with accepting the risk, which means that you don't take any action to deal with it. And then because when it happens, you would use either your reserve. So for instance, we know it will rain. Well, the fact that it will rain, we put in, when it happened, we put in measures to deal with it. Somebody could be sick on the project. Well, we wouldn't, because of that, go and set up a whole hospital on a project. We will find means of dealing with that situation when a team member falls. So some of those risks are the ones we accept. Then for positive risk, which are opportunities, there are 4 strategies. You either exploit, you enhance it, you share, you accept. And the technologies speak for themselves. And because of time, I will not want to go through so much of it. But the important thing is exploiting means that you really, really want to maximize project opportunities using modern technologies. Enhancing is to increase the probability or the impact of the project opportunities. So adding more resources to reduce completion time, because when you complete early, it sells better for them. And sharing, entering into joint venture, just ventureship, collaborations, and other things are all means of sharing. Then accepting, when it comes to project risk opportunities or project opportunities, accepting positive risks means that you would not take any positive action to pursue the project opportunities. But the company or the project team will be happy if the benefits crystallize. So after going through all these processes, we have what we call the project risk register. Again, it's critical. And this is I took it from a racing company. So you look, there are colors for risk identification number, the risk description, cost indication, which are costed. And then we have probability, impact. All these are filled from the previous work we've discussed. Then the risk response strategies are well laid out. For instance, one of them, mitigation. So get gifts ahead of time, detach number at finish, and keep in order at finish line for eventual compilation. This response action is specific. So when it happens, the process risk owner knows how to respond, and then there will be a risk owner on it. So this is what happens eventually. Now, the final one, which is risk monitoring, and risk monitoring and control is very critical. So the purpose of risk monitoring and control is to do two things. Ensure that we are implementing the risk response and plans according to plan. We are tracking identified risks and new ones on the project. Monitoring residual risk. Residual risk is the risk that remains after you've put in all control measures to address the identified risks. So it's important that residual risks are monitored, and evaluating the effectiveness of the risk response. These are the four main objectives that we intend to achieve when it comes to risk monitoring and control. So there are other reasons. First of all, risk response have to be effectively implemented and monitored, whether new project risks have emerged, whether project risks or project assumptions still remain valid. These are reasons why we do a lot of risk monitoring, to check whether the new risk response strategies are needed, and then more importantly, to check whether the risk management plan is being followed or project risks have changed. Now, so typically, these are the processes, these are the tools that you need to do a lot of the risk monitoring processes. So we have the project management plan, the risk register, work performance data, and then risk assessment, risk audit. So in order to bring my presentation to the close at the risk of being stopped by my chief executive, the important thing is that the risk management process is very vital for all projects, whether small, medium, or big. It is important that every team member on the project understands the rudiments of risk management, right from the beginning to the end. It involves a lot of training, a lot of commitment of effort to understand the process, monitoring the risk, determining residual risks, and everything are all critical to ensuring project success. More so in this time where financial challenges have become very, very apparent. Government is finding it difficult world over to fund projects. So there are going to be a lot of events which will present other opportunities or risks on projects. And we should be able to identify them, manage them properly, and ensure project success. On this note, I wish to say a big thank you to you